Welcome, everyone, to our first Chicago Blend event. I'm Lindsay Knight, the founder of Chicago Blend and a VC at Chicago Ventures. So we're calling this event a town hall because we're using it as a way to let you hear from many voices. Although Blend is an organization of venture capitalists, we're hosting this hour for anyone and everyone who's interested in DEI and Chicago tech. The hour is jam-packed and is meant to give you a look at what we've been working on, but more importantly, to give you tactical advice and perspective from leaders in Chicago. Since you're already here, we assume you understand why this work is important. We don't think we need to spend time making the case for diversity, but rather we want to give you all a chance to tap into some of the best tactics our friends and partners have offered to share with the community. You can feel free to drop questions into the chat during our 3 lightning talks. And if you want to tweet along to share what you learn, you can use the hashtag BlendTownHall. So I'd first like to spend a few minutes on the Blend founding story and then give you a short update on how we're planning for the future. Chicago Blend is a collaborative effort led by Chicago's venture capitalists to track, support, and increase diversity, equity, and inclusion at our own firms and at the startups that we invest in. Collaborative is a key word here. Venture capital can be a competitive industry, but our board members and partnering organizations know that to move the needle when it comes to diversity, we need to work together. We exist to help Chicago's tech ecosystem become the most inclusive in the world, and to make sure every venture capital firm in town is motivated to do the right thing. We exist because we all believe this work is critical, and we know that more diverse teams lead to better financial outcomes. We incorporated as a 501c3 this summer in order to take this mission to the next level. I've talked to many of you over the years about Blend, and I've been inspired by the support and energy from Chicago's tech community to get involved. So we know that there are a lot of organizations around town touching DEI, and we know that VCs have a unique and sometimes powerful place in the ecosystem. 2.5 years ago, we launched with a critical question. Where are the major gaps in demographics in Chicago's VCs and startups, and where do we, as VCs, have an opportunity and an obligation to enact change? Dollars aside, we think intentionality is an obvious start. And we've pushed the venture community to be intentional about team building and investing. We've prioritized creating transparency, visibility, and access for both founders and candidates to the sometimes opaque world of venture. Now, looking back at 2 years of data, we're happy to see some progress. In 2020, we reported that Chicago has seen increases in diversity in our venture firms, with women in venture, for instance, increasing from 28 to 33%. And here's an example of how we've used the data we collect in other ways. Back in 2019, we noticed a glaring gap in representation at the startup board level, with less than 10% of board members who are women and less than 2% of board members who are Black or Latinx. This felt like something we should tackle. We often make suggestions for independent board members for our portfolio companies. So we launched an initiative called the Blend List to help fill this gap. We often hear about a pipeline problem, that people don't know any Black board members or any women engineers. We know that recruiting can be tough, but we believe in our world, this isn't a pipeline problem. It's more of a network or an access problem. As in all of our initiatives, we hope to create network access and visibility to great candidates or founders who don't already have a way in. In that same vein, we've also focused on creating access through our open office hours for underrepresented founders and aspiring VCs. We've created pipelines of underrepresented talent by partnering with organizations like the Mom Project, Women Who Code, and Intello. And we've compiled the best resources for startups and VCs to get started in DEI. All of this information is available on our website, chicagoblend.org. So we know that this work is a marathon, not a sprint, and that there's a lot more that we can do. In 2021, we're kicking off the next leg of our journey to build a sustainable institution. Moving forward, our focus is hire and wire. Hire, meaning we'll focus on bringing folks who are underrepresented and may have non-traditional backgrounds into venture. And wire, meaning we'll focus on creating more connections between VCs and startups led by underrepresented founders. Soon, we're launching a startup matching program to help enable those connections. We want to make venture and Chicago's venture capitalists feel more accessible and eliminate that pipeline problem excuse. we want to provide VCs and the startups they back the tools and resources to build equitable and inclusive teams. We want Chicago's VC community to collaborate on best practices around DEI in order to better serve founders. We'll share more at the end of this hour, but we want you to be the first to know that we're hiring an executive director to continue building on these initiatives. We'll welcome your help as we launch that recruitment process. So we hope this hour is a peek into the work we've been focused on, touching our funders, our teams, and the startups we invest in. We're committed to putting in the work to move the needle and hope that you and the Chicago tech ecosystem can all benefit from being a part of the most inclusive and collaborative tech ecosystem in the world. Thanks again for your support of Blend and of this work. So now we'll get into the fun stuff. I'm going to pass it over to my board colleague, Ryan, who will spend a few minutes sharing the results from our latest startup data collection. Thanks.
Thanks, Lindsay, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan Mundy, and I am a Blend board member, angel investor, and now entrepreneur, founder, CEO of Alchemy Health. As Lindsay mentioned, we've always been driven by data, and we suspected there was a lack of parity at many levels. And we have worked to understand where the biggest gaps are that we can have an impact on. And over the last 2 years, we focused on collecting demographic data for Chicago's VCs and venture-backed startups. If you want to check out our past data, you can view the data tab on our website. All of this work has been done in partnership with the Polsky Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and we're extremely grateful for their support. On this slide, here's a quick glance of the 2 years of VC data, which Lindsay referenced earlier. We're not yet close to parity, but we've been happy to see some small increases in both racial and gender diversity between 2018 and 2020. Again, you can check all this data out on our website. But now for some new numbers. We just put the finishing touches on our 2020 startup data, so you all are the first to see the numbers. And we're excited to share these. We collected data from just over 100 startups backed by Chicago's VCs and have seen demographic diversity increase in nearly every measured category from 2019 to 2020. Most notably, we saw an overall increase in racial and ethnic minority representation among all employees. In 2019, employees were 22.2% non-white in 2020, and it was a 35.4% non-white, and that's 59.4% growth year over year. So that's very exciting and very encouraging. The bulk of this growth was driven by increasing Hispanic representation. In 2019, representation was 7.2%. In 2020, it was 15.5%. That is 115% growth, which is extremely encouraging. For reference, Asian representation grew 26% and Black representation grew 31%. Every functional group surveyed, for example, technical roles, more than doubled its Hispanic representation from 2019 to 2020. Additionally, women CEOs we found were more likely to hire women employees. 50% of employees at companies with women CEOs are women. Companies led by men are 39% women. Women CEOs are more than 3 times more likely to have women board members than men CEOs. Similarly, non-white CEOs are more likely to hire non-white employees. 49% of employees at non-white CEO companies are not white. White CEO companies are 29% not white. Non-white CEOs are nearly 4 times more likely to have non-white board members. And I could speak from personal experience launching my new company that this is definitely a focus and something that I strive and work to represent and increase these numbers as well. And have a lived experience as a non-white CEO. The bulk of my staff is women and also non-white. So there's definitely correlation there. This is a lot to digest for sure in a couple of minutes. We have thousands of data points and lots of other nuggets to pull from this data set. But again, you'll be able to access this data on our website later this week. We know that data can tell a lot of stories. And so we'll always share the raw anonymized data so that you can parse it as you like. Aside from increasing representation, our hope is that you can use the data to benchmark in your own organization. Now I'm going to pass it on to my board colleague, Gail, who will tell you about our donors.
Thanks, Ryan. It's really exciting to see the data. We've been working hard for 2 years and very appreciative that many of you are joining us on this mission. And before I go further, I also want to stop and make sure that we thank our fearless leader, Lindsay Knight, who has been instrumental in getting this off the ground. So thank you very much to Lindsay and the rest of the board members. And now I am very excited to have a moment here to thank our sponsors, because as a 501c3 organization, we could not do this alone. So thank you to these folks. We have founding champion donors, including RelishWorks, Listen Ventures, Hyde Park Venture Partners, Steve Miller and Origin Ventures, Energize Ventures, and Manifold Group. And we're also happy to welcome our champion donor, Wells Fargo, and our supporting donors, who are Integrity Power Search and Cognos HR. And then finally, we're grateful to Dentons for providing in-kind legal support, and also, of course, to Polsky, who is our data partner. And unfortunately, we all can't clap for them, but we are very excited and really appreciative for these folks. If you're interested in learning more about ways that you and your organization can support, please reach out to us at info@chicagoblend.org. And then finally, that wraps up our sponsor section. Thanks again. Now I'd like to introduce our first set of speakers. We have Rodrigo Garcia, Deputy State Treasurer, Chief Investment Officer, and Chief Financial Officer for the Office of the Illinois State Treasurer. That's a mouthful. And Aaron Gillum, Senior Vice President at 50 South Capital, for a conversation about why the state of Illinois and LPs care about diversity. Aaron, over to you to kick it off.
Hey, thank you, Gail. Rodrigo, how are you doing today? So we should probably set the premise that, Rodrigo and I know each other well, so we could probably carry this conversation for the entire hour. But I think it's fair, Rodrigo, that maybe we set the stage, at a high level. And if you don't mind, maybe sharing your thoughts about just why is diversity important in venture capital?
Most definitely. Well, I will tell you the Office of the Illinois State Treasurer performs many roles. And just to bifurcate a bit, the Office of the State Treasurer is different than that of other offices under the purview of the governor. The State Treasurer is an office we all, for those of you who are residents of the state of Illinois, that we vote for. And so it is independent of the jurisdiction of the governor. And so that provides a significant amount of flexibility in terms of how we are able to provide impact. So chief among our roles is we are the state's chief investment officer, and we are the state's chief banking officer. So in that role, we actively invest about $35 billion or so across 7 different investment portfolios, each with its own distinct investment objectives and set of parameters. So with that, we know that 2020 has been an extraordinary year in so many ways, both here at home and around the world, from the global health crisis and the economic fallout caused by the coronavirus pandemic to which has actually disproportionately affected people of color, to massive protests following a flood of racially motivated violence in the US that has been around pervasive social issues like systemic racism, to uneven access to healthcare and economic inequality, which has been brought back into the spotlight yet again. And so, unfortunately, many of these issues are not new in the US. And in fact, I'd say that many of them are tied to the very origins of our country and are deeply embedded in the fabric of our society. And, this must change. I can tell you personally and otherwise that many of us who are seeking work around diversity and inclusion, we're not here to beg. We're not here to threaten. We're only here to participate. And so with that in mind, institutional investors such as us and the investment advisors that we utilize, including our good friends at 50 South Capital, we have a pivotal role in advancing diversity. We should be constantly evaluating the diversity of our management teams and staff. We should be constantly evaluating the fair and equitable corporate practices of the firms that we invest in. We should be investing in funds led by women and people of color. We should be investing in diverse-led businesses addressing issues in communities of color and of women. And we should hire investment firms with a proven track record of equity, diversity, and inclusion across the board. Illinois is home to 2 million African Americans and home to 2 million Latinos and home to more than 6 million women. Yet this issue of diversity in venture capital is one that has been recalcitrant for some time. So, as you know, Aaron, through our massive capital cannon, the Illinois Growth and Innovation Fund, which for those of you that are not familiar with it, it's a $1 billion evergreen impact investment vehicle where to date, we've committed about $450 million, deploying about $125 million a year. So we are the largest Illinois-focused investor and by leaps and bounds, and we have been utilizing this to really push the envelope on diversity and inclusion. And happy to get into details, but I'll pause there.
Yeah, and I mean, going into that, the ILGIF strategy, of finding, the best venture fund managers that are investing in Illinois companies. We also look for firms that have a demonstrated commitment to diversity, both among their staff and their portfolio companies. That is actually a part of our mandate. And to date, we have, I believe, 20 managers, WMVD fund managers. Just over 41% of our committed capital, dollar-wise, has gone to WMVD fund managers.
And now for our audience, because we use this acronym back and forth, right, Aaron? But for those that are not familiar, I don't necessarily like to use the word minority that often because there's certain, we'll say, vestiges associated with that word. And so we tend to use MWVD, which is a much more inclusive acronym and or just diverse, right? But the MWVD stands. It's military veterans, it's women, it's people with disabilities, and it's underrepresented minorities. And so, as you mentioned, 40% of our investments have gone to date to this demographic. And for us, we're very proud of that because all of you who know the numbers within VC, they tend to be in the single digits and they're horrible. And so we're very proud of that, but we feel that we're not done yet. And as you know, Aaron, we continue to try to push the ball forward on this effort. And I like to utilize the funnel approach. It's not just continuing to fund existing VCs that are doing good work out in the industry that may be led by women or people of color, but it's building new VCs. It's utilizing catalyst capital to help create new VCs. So it's not just about the depth of the ecosystem, but the breadth as well as helping firms or new venture capitalists emerge, creating track records, and then helping folks break into VCs, but with internships and other aspects. And so, when we look at diversity and inclusion, it's from the partners to the investment staff, to the founders that are being funded, to the portfolio company staff, and really affecting change at every level. And for those of you who, assuming when I say you, those of you who are VCs and we have done business, you have seen that we're now including many of these aspects in our side letters by asking funds to take on certain commitments to equity, diversity, and inclusion as part of our effort to really continue to drive the ball forward. Now, with that said, though, Aaron, you've been at the front line here doing a lot of this work in partnership with our office, but also with other, many of your other clients, and you've been in the, in this ecosystem for a number of years now. So I would love to hear a little bit about how why you think this work is important to you and to your firm 50 South, and how you've been able to commit some time on our behalf and otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, I would say a lot has changed in the ecosystem over the last several years, and over the last 12 months, it has exponentially changed. And what I mean by that is, people used to throw around the word diversity, I think, more as a buzzword. It's like, yeah, we know about it. but I think a lot of the events of 2020 and, you know, kicking off the new year here, I think just a lot of firms, fund managers, startups, corporations, you know, had to do some inside thinking and just really understand, hey, there's a big segment or a big issue, you know, with us not having a diverse staff or, you know, diverse portfolio of companies that we're talking to, especially in venture capital, you know, with a lot of fund managers who pride themselves over having proprietary deal flow, but yet don't have access to, you know, minority founders or women founders. I always found that to be interesting. You know, and then when you see the stats, you know, we mentioned how, you know, single digits in terms of who gets funding, you know, 1% might go to African-American women, you know, under 2% goes to Hispanic founders. You know, and even when you look at it on the flip side, about 50% of all VCs attended Stanford or Harvard. So you not only have like a lack of, you know, racial and gender diversity, you also have a lack of cognitive diversity in this space. And I think that's something where, you know, when we're evaluating funds and talking to venture fund managers, you know, working with the treasurer's office, I think the best part about our role is we get to be creative. We need to attack this problem, you know, in a way that just, it hasn't been looked at before. And the treasurer's office has been very supportive of that. You know, and when I say creative, you know, I mean, hey, taking a look at whether it be, you know, backing a first-time fund manager, taking a look at, you know, a fund that might still just be early, might be on a fund 2 or fund 3, but just early in their progress. You know, really doing a deep dive with founders, trying to understand how they work with the investors. And then also looking at the community partners out there. I mean, we work with groups like Chicago Blend, groups like HBCU VC, Allraise. I mean, these are all groups that play in this ecosystem, you know, that I think help us put together, at the end of the day, will be the best and highest returning portfolio for a fund of funds. So I think that's our job, is to be creative and attack it, you know, in a different way. You know, from an institutional standpoint, you know, and having to make the diversity argument, you know, at the statewide level, you know, I'll say to the taxpayers for the state of Illinois. Maybe you can share kind of what you've heard, you know, not only from, you know, folks in government in the state, but maybe even some of your peers, you know, in other states, you know, other institutions around the country. Because from everything I've heard, you know, what we're doing in Illinois is cutting edge. But I don't want to be, you know, tooting our own horn. What are you seeing? What are you hearing?
Yeah, most definitely. You know, it takes a structured framework to facilitate change in such deeply rooted social issues. You know, it takes leadership. You know, it starts at the top. Philosophy, it's a change in our mindset. It's policies and processes, which is the cultural competencies. It takes ingenuity. It's thinking outside the box. And accountability. It's kind of the measurement and evaluation of change. These are all critical dimensions that are needed to address the realities of today's disparities. You know, we continue to push forward on expanding opportunity, as we've just discussed, Aaron, for a number of diverse asset management firms, in this case, diverse venture capitalists, by breaking the mold on systemic barriers that oftentimes keep many firms out. And these are things like minimum check sizes and minimum fund size or minimum GP commits or minimum tenure that prevent many women and minorities from participating. And we are breaking that mold by removing many of those, as has been evidenced by our portfolio of managers across the board from all walks of life. You know, when I talk to many of my counterparts around the country, fellow chief investment officers that are now waking up to this whole notion of diversity and inclusion over the last year, you know, the first thing that I tell them is, when we as investors design and apply policies, practices, or rules that maybe appear neutral or innocuous, but yet result in a disproportionate impact on women and communities of color, we are inadvertently promoting prejudiced and biased systems. And so we must be the change that we seek. You know, diversity within finance is a cornerstone of investment. Having diversity within, you know, asset classes, diversity of managers, And so we increase returns by increasing perspective. And talent knows no gender, race, or ethnicity. And how can we systematically exclude a third of our population? We're talking about race and ethnicity, or 50% of our population, we're talking about gender. So as I tell them, because if not now, then when? If not us, then who? And then if not here, then where? And so it is a conversation that is very present, but it's one that we should ensure that is not based on tokenism, and it's one that is not just based on the time today, but one that the change that we affect, it is one that is sustainable in perpetuity and that is lasting, to ensure that we are truly building in not just the value proposition, but that we are building equity into the system that I hope we're all in, not just because of the dollars, but because of what it is providing in terms of innovation and change and opportunity for the population of tomorrow. Now, you, Aaron, on the other hand, have had experience from not just the venture side, but also the startup side. And so I would be interested, I gave you a little bit of perspective as an institutional investor and some of the work that we've been doing there, but you also have this interesting dynamic of being, a founder. So I'm curious as to what is your perspective in terms of, startups versus investment, because you've straddled both sides, as well as to what you see the biggest challenges moving ahead as we kind of close out our conversation.
Yeah, being a startup founder, especially if you're I'll say a WMVD founder, it can be tough if you don't know where to find investment capital, if you don't even know what venture capital is or have access to that network. It can be daunting. It's a daunting process. I mentor a lot of founders and try to coach them early about how the process works and not to be afraid of it. At the same time, you always hear these terms like, in terms of the stages of fundraising, you go to your family and friends first, then you raise your angel round, then you raise your seed round, and so forth. But if you don't have a family and friends connection, that you don't know what to do. You have to either skip a step or you just give up early. And so I think, being able to find investors, who want to invest early, who are looking for the best ideas, getting them access to those founders earlier is key. And I've tried to do it. I've seen a lot of early stage VCs who've worked with incubators, accelerators, colleges, so forth, trying to get out there earlier, just to show that they are transparent, they are accessible. Because I think that's, if you're going to be a venture capitalist, you need to be accessible. From a in terms of, I think the next discussion is going to be around collecting data. So I wanted to make sure, we mentioned the word maybe accountability. If you're going to be a founder or if you're going to be an investor in this space, you might think that you're accountable for growing your business. You're accountable for investing in good deals. And yes, you are. But if you're going to, kind of continue this discussion or continue this tradition of what we've been talking about, Rodrigo and I and the Chicago Blend team, kind of holding yourself accountable to, being mindful of diversity on your staff, diversity in your portfolio, being transparent, showing the data. It's actually okay if today your company is not where you want it to be, but you need to at least identify that. You need to be able to, at least have a starting point, and then be able to go out, and build upon your network, reach out to people, who can help you improve on your diversity in your staffing, diversity of ideas, because at the end of the day, there's tons of research out there that just show it's just a better return for your company. It's a better return for your portfolio. It's a better return for everything when you really look at it that way. So I'll leave it at that. But Rodrigo, if you have any closing points before we transition over.
I'll just make one closing piece, and that is, if you don't have diversity and inclusion within your company or within your fund, you're costing me money or the potential for money. And if you do that, I could tell you that you're already at the bottom of the rung for consideration. As we continue to make investment and commitments throughout the VC community, And as we continue to make Chicago the preeminent place for startups and VC, we're going to continue to push for diversity and inclusion. So if you want to come talk to us about money, I hope you come ready with a number of data points and how you're going to be pushing for diversity and inclusion in alignment with the work of Chicago Blend and the Illinois Growth and Innovation Fund.
Yeah, well said. Lindsay, I think we'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. I love that. I knew you two would not hold back and throw in some good advice, but also some bold statements. So thank you so much. That was awesome, and hope the audience got a lot out of that. So next, we're going to move into 3 really quick 5-minute each lightning talks. These are meant to be really tactical from a handful of folks in the ecosystem. You will have a chance to ask questions. So if you want to use the Q&A function, we're going to keep an eye on those. And if we have time at the end of each lightning talk, we'll go into the Q&A. Our first lightning talk here is Alexandra Christou from Spot Hero, and she is going to share how to collect demographic data at your startup, the best practices that they've used at Spot Hero. So Alexandra, I'll pass it over to you for the next 5 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you, Lindsay. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandra Christou. I am the HR generalist at Spot Hero. Today, I'm really excited to talk to you about how to collect your company's demographic data. I know a lot of you may be in a smaller stage of your company where you might not necessarily have to report it, but I'm here to tell you why it's a good idea to start collecting it now, and then how to collect it and what you can do once you have that data. So you can go to the next slide, please. Just really quickly, so Chicago Blend, when Lindsay first introduced me to this data, I was really excited because for years I had been looking for a solution of how to compare ourselves to companies that were like us, because while those giant tech companies had released their information online, it was really hard to compare Spot Hero, which was such a small company, to one of those global companies with employees in every country that had thousands of people. It just didn't make sense. So I definitely encourage you all to use Chicago Blend's data to benchmark your own companies against. Next slide, please. So why start now? The sooner you start, the better. Obviously, it will reduce the administrative burden when you do have to report your EEO-1 data. Just as a reminder, companies that are either 100 employees or more, or they have 50 employees and a government contract over $50,000, do have to report this data to the government every year. But if you're under that size, it's still a good idea to collect this data for a few different reasons. One, it establishes a culture that values diversity. So by signaling to your employees that you are collecting this data and actively looking at it and figuring out ways to improve it, it shows them that this is something that is built into the foundation of your company and that you're going to continue to commit to improving. Next, employees value transparency. So even potential companies, potential employees do ask about this during the interview process. And like was mentioned earlier, transparency is great. Even if you don't have, the stats of where you hope you would be, it's important to actively talk about these things. Next slide, please. So how to get started. Make it a priority to analyze and collect this data. As was mentioned before, it's really important to use it as a key metric that you're tracking. You're tracking so many other things. This is one that should be part of that. Have one person own this as well, whether it's someone on your people team or your legal team. Making sure that one person's responsible for this ensures that it doesn't fall through the cracks. So if you have employees who you don't know the demographic data for, send out a self-identification form to your existing employees. Please note this is obviously an optional form. They don't have to submit it. And then integrate this data collection into your onboarding. It's a really great way to collect this information up front. So new hires, they're filling out so many forms. This is just another one, and that's an easy way to get the information as well. So once you have that information, record it into your HRIS. I would highly encourage you to invest in a really good tool that lets you pull reports from your information, because as you grow, the things that you care about are going to change. So the way you look at, say, your departments or your levels, they're going to change. So you're going to want to be able to manipulate that data. And then finally, do an initial report. This was mentioned earlier as well. Just get a snapshot of where you're at today. It might not be where you want to be, but if you know your baseline, then you can figure out tactics to move forward and get to where you want to be. Next slide, please. So what to do with the data once you have it? You have so much information already right at your fingertips. It's so important to get those key insights for it. So obviously, when you are of a certain size, make sure you are filing the EEO-1 reports. But besides that, use it to analyze your current workforce to identify areas where diversity lacks. So whether that's, oh, we actually have no women in this department, or this group is very homogenous. This data can tell you that, and it's a really good way to present it to others in the company when making a case to improve it. Then build it into your recruiting strategy. So whenever we open a new role, we pull the data from that team and say, okay, well, this team is actually all white males. It would be really important to hire someone else into this team from a different demographic. And then also perform periodic pay equity audits. So this is so important to do, especially as you're a small company and grow. You want to make sure that you are just making sure that everything is equal across the board and there aren't any issues, and everyone's getting paid equitably. That way you avoid any potential liabilities in the future. Next slide, please. And finally, other things to consider. So make sure you meet those filing deadlines when you need to. Think about expanding beyond the EEO categories. There are so many out there beyond just race, ethnicity, and gender. Think about sexual orientation, disability, even if people are parents. There are so many different ways that people can be diverse and that you can capture that data. And then once you have it, consider employee resource groups. Maybe there's a group of women in engineering that you could really foster a good community within that department. Make sure you use Chicago Blends data to benchmark your own to see where you fall against similar companies. Also remember that the employee is always the first source of truth. So if they say they are of a certain race and you thought otherwise, absolutely stick with what they told you they are. And then finally, this information is highly sensitive. So just make sure that any information that's published can never be tied back to an individual because they are trusting you with their private information. So next slide, please. That is the end of my presentation. I thank you all for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions if they've come up. Also happy to connect offline if people have other questions about what we've done at Spot Hero.
Alexandra, that was amazing. And I think you covered so many practical and tactical tips for us to implement in our own organizations and, for SVCs, the organizations that we're helping along the way. So I really appreciate it. It looks like you have your email up there. So anyone who has other questions, please feel free to reach out. Next up, we have Jenny Farber, who is with 8Light. She's here to talk about why a diverse board is important and how to recruit diverse board members. Jenny, thanks for being with us, and I'll hand it over.
Thanks, Jackie. As Jackie said, my name is Jenny Farber, and I'm the co-CEO of software consultancy 8Light. We're headquartered in Chicago, here in Chicago, and we have about 130 employees in 6 cities in the US and UK. Our customers seek us out for our commitment to quality software. And a big part of how we do that is we do this crazy thing called training. We call it our apprenticeship program. And we hire classes of high potential software developers and designers. We mentor them in their craft. And we do that so that every 8Light developer or designer is fully prepared to carry our quality brand promise. Apprenticeship is the primary way we hire our technical workforce, and it's a critical part of our DEI efforts. So I recently joined 8Light as co-CEO after having served on its board for about 3 years. Before that, my past several roles had been as a CTO at various Chicago venture-backed startups. And I know the Chicago Blend Project through that network, and of course I am on the Chicago Blend list. At 8Light, our board is elected by shareholders, including employee owners. And we're currently in our election process right now. And yes, we use the Chicago Blend list to help us build candidates for the slate. Next slide, please. So boards can vary, but whatever they do, they should exist to ensure that the CEO and the management team are acting correctly. And that's a simple but really abstract and ultimately complex role. And it's at the heart of why diversity on corporate boards is important. What does it mean to act correctly? Who decides what is correct and what are their values or priorities? And as far as I'm aware, there's no one professional path that has a monopoly on ethics, on judgment, on empathy, futurism, or even forecasting. So the question is, how can you bring in different perspectives to ensure that your company is in fact acting in the best interest of stakeholders, including shareholders? One thing that I've seen is that it does matter to our employee owners at A-Flight that our board is diverse and representative. And in 2020, employees specifically asked whether and how our board monitors the company's DEI achievements. So yes, if you're wondering, are your employees paying attention to the composition of your board? Yes, they are. Next slide. So talking about building a board, my advice is to build a board as you would a team. And so remember that on a great team, there is challenge, there is contrast, and there is energy. And that's what gets the team to perform at its peak. So when you think about composing your board, ask yourself, are you bringing in perspectives that create that vibe? Next slide. I think we all have a few of the kind of classic archetypes of a board member, and those are kind of biased towards funders, industry heavyweights, entrepreneurs, and perhaps in your field, maybe even certain academics. But you can create that challenge, that contrast, and that energy by widening your search to other things that might really energize your board. Consultants who have seen it all, systems thinkers, media savvy influencers, managers, great managers, data people. And I would say there's a lot of value to even a voracious reader, somebody who reads everything, all the newspapers, all the bestsellers. That person is thoughtful and really knows where we are as a society and where we're going. So next slide. So my path to being on a board involved a few people opening a door for me. One was Paul Pagel, my co-CEO at A-Flight, who several years ago started choicefully building a board for the company. And another was a mentor, Roger Liu, who connected me to the opportunity. And so you may not actually be the one building a board right now, but you can play a role in building impactful and diverse boards by thinking about who you refer and what is your role in referrals. Who do you know that energizes and challenges people, whether or not they match one of those classic archetypes? And when you're asked for a referral, can you encourage the search to take this perspective of an energizing, balanced team? My advice for approaching potential board members is just to demystify the opportunity. A lot of great potential board members may not know what to expect and would feel embarrassed to ask. So just being very transparent with how frequent are the meetings, what type of day, what's the compensation, how much prep work is there. And if you're referring, it's great to be actively available for potential questions too. Potential board members might want to know, how do board members typically make time away for their day jobs or board work, and just helping them with those answers. Beyond that, this is just like any other recruiting, so what's the pitch? And for me, being on a board member has been a great compliment to my day job, and it's really accelerated my career. That's a pretty good pitch. A board seat can help someone spin up on a new industry. It can also balance their perspective if their primary role is as an operator. Many of our day jobs are about passion and people and details and gotchas, but a board role can actually strengthen your ability to take a long-term perspective or to be ruthlessly objective in your business thinking, and that's certainly been true for me. And don't forget to sell the team. Working on a team with other talented people is a great part of being on a board, and I've certainly learned a lot from my colleagues, especially those that have come from outside the tech community circles that I usually run around in. Next slide. I think that's all I've got. So thank you, and happy to take questions.
Yeah, Jenny, that was great. I mean, you put together some amazing frameworks for how we should think more strategically about putting our boards together, and then obviously filling them in accordingly. From a super tactical perspective, we start a lot of our early boards with founders and funders. When you go through to add that first person who's independent, or maybe not, kind of like the natural person who's on the board, how can you seek out people that aren't directly in your kind of first degree network?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the network is effective, like friends of friends gets you to a really broad network. And so I think that's the key is, think about people who are in the farther reaches of your network and get the word out to them. And when you do that, make sure that they know that you're not looking for one of those classic archetypes, or you might not be, and give them some ideas that help them start thinking about, oh, who would be great here?
That's awesome. And do you put together, kind of key attributes or almost like a pseudo job description for these folks, or how do you think about guiding people to share their networks with you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure that I have a firm framework on that. I think I'm pretty loose, and so sorry that I don't have a great answer to that question.
No, I think part of it can probably be drawn back to your earlier slides about, expanding how we think about, the types of peoples we can plug in. Jenny, this has been great having you. Thank you so much for your time and tactical tips. Up next, we have Rick and Nika from Listen to talk about how VCs can encourage diversity.
Thanks so much, Jackie. You can go to the next slide. First, we just want to start by saying a big thank you to Lindsay and the entire Chicago Blend team for bringing us together and creating a space for us to have conversations like this. If you want to go to the next slide, I'm Nika Longo, and I'm on the platform team at Listen, and I'm joined with Rick Desai, who is a partner and head of investments. Just a quick background on Listen and our relationship with Blend. Listen is a consumer-focused venture capital firm, and we operate a concentrated investment strategy to back visionary entrepreneurs and build the brands of tomorrow. Because we're concentrated, we're able to dig in deeper with our founders and their teams. So in addition to capital, we also help our entrepreneurs make strategic and creative leaps that drive better business and build brands that change perceptions and challenge the status quo. We're super pumped to be here. We've known the folks who started Blend for quite some time now, and we're excited to be a part of the community they're building. Listen wanted to be more than just financial partners, even though that's incredibly important. So we helped them the only way that we knew how, which was digging in to support them and helping create their brand. The whole Listen fam is super thankful for the work that Chicago Blend is doing, and we can't wait for what's to come in 2021. Rick's going to kick us off to share a bit more about our journey.
Cool. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Nika. You can flip to the next page. This summer was really a wake-up call for us. To be honest, we thought we were doing our part in DE&I. The makeup of our team and our investments were increasingly female. We encourage a diversity perspective. We worked with Blend, and being inclusive is a core value to us. What we've learned is that being inclusive is not enough. And for me specifically, I recognize that while I'm a minority statistically, I'm a minority with privilege. So, systemic issues that pose challenges for people of color is our problem and cannot be ignored. Diversity is no longer a nice to have, it's a mandate and it's our responsibility. And we as was said earlier today, we strongly believe it's integral to enterprise value creation. So for us, it's been a commitment to intention. No different than why a founder, all the founders that we support, they often pursue insurmountable challenges or problems, and they do it because they're driven by being unsettled. They're driven by the feelings they have. They're unsettled by the status quo. Likewise, I think we all need to remain just as unsettled, just as uncomfortable as we felt this summer. We can't let this fade. At least Listen, we can't let this fade with the tweet or with the donation. You can flip to the next page. So the first thing we did was to step back and take stock of where we were. A big hat tip to Ilgif and to Blend, and especially Samara, if she's on, who first suggested that we collect our founder level data years ago. We'll start with our own human capital. Our core team is roughly split up between male and female. Our listener program, which is our business school internship program, represents a really great diverse makeup of both perspective and ethnicity that we want to build on. However, the truth is that the makeup of our founders remains disproportionately white male. If you flip to the next page, we'll show you our funnel. We've seen increased activity at the bottom of our funnel here in both Black and female-led companies. Of the 7 companies we've offered terms to over the past 18 months, 6 were led by female founders and 2 by Black founders. And the 3 deals we closed were led by women. However, the top of the funnel requires all of our work, all of our attention, and a lot more intention. We've had only 25 Black-led deals in this period of time, over 800 qualified opportunities. And not until Q3 of the past year did we start collecting data on our Latinx founders. You know, the dearth at the top of this funnel to us is truly a consequence of our relying on our existing networks. You know, networks that look like us, networks that are easy for us to access, networks that influence who we hire, who we invest in, who we recruit at our portfolio companies. And if venture, I think Aaron alluded to this, if venture capital is about backing extraordinary founders who can pull off the impossible, you know, it's truly incumbent on us to build better networks, to source and evaluate founders against this new lens, so that we can look beyond the typical pedigree. So a lot of learnings and reflections of this past year, and hopefully a lot more to come. But over to you, Nika.
Thanks, Rick. If you can go to the next slide, please. So like Rick just said, we needed to shift from being inclusive to being intentional about that. So to do so, we've adopted a listen more, learn more, do more philosophy, which at its core is about expanding our network. We believe this starts with conversations like this one and others that allow us to form partnerships with our Black and Brown VC peers in sourcing more diverse founders and talent. Given our focus on consumer behavior change, we know this also means adding programs to our platform that includes people of color voices. For example, we've started hosting brand workshops with underrepresented founders in Chicago, like Kareem Wells at The Corner Story. As we've listened, we're learning. We've seen that expanding our networks leads to a stronger and more representative pipeline. And above all, we've learned that we have much, much more to learn. Rick and I are heading up things at Listen, and we're loaded with doubts and insecurities. So we're thankful for people like Lindsay who are in our corner that have been a rock for us throughout this process. We were nearly set to kick off a formal partnership with a training and recruiting firm, and we realized that we weren't certain in our own foundation. And now we're working with firms to assist us in unconscious bias training for our team before we bring it to our portfolios. The organizations on the next slide, if you don't mind going to it, are just a handful of the companies we've been having conversations with, and we'll be sure to share who we end up moving forward with once we lock that in. But if any of these companies pique your interest, we're more than happy to make introductions to the folks that we've chatted with. It's been a really wonderful and eye-opening journey for Rick and I. And if you go to the next slide. Finally, we know that we have to do more. I know that there is a lot of words on this page, but just bear with me. This means walking the walk for Listen. So although there are improvements for us to make internally at Listen, our largest opportunity of impact is at the portfolio level. Looking at all of our fund and angel deals over the last couple of years, our companies have hired over 1,000 people. So as we kick off our new fund, we're piloting a new commitment with future portfolio companies that we're calling the Listen More stance. As you can see on both the top and the bottom of this page, this is not completely final yet, but in the sake of transparency, and the more you know, we just wanted to share where we're at with it. But what this is an investment that we're mutually committing to with our founders, which is blend reporting, board diversity, employee benefit review, founder wellness, and sponsoring a DE&I specific investment that will be determined based on where that portfolio company is at on their DE&I journey. So if you go to the next slide. Here's just a quick recap on the left of what you can do and what we've done, if it's helpful for you guys to follow suit at all. Like Rick said, taking stock, I think, was a huge eye-opener for us in the beginning, to just know that we needed to expand our network and begin conversations with other people that weren't in our main circle, and creating a stance that is something that we can agree on with our future founders to make sure that we're doing business with people who reflect the values that we have as well. And given Listen's approach on brand and creativity, once we lock in this partner, we hope to find ways to bring voices and ideas outside of our own team to our platform to make sure that we're, continuing to elevate people outside of our team. And lastly, we always just want to say, like Rick said, staying uncomfortable is key to this process, and keep listening. It's really wonderful what you can listen and learn when you open those ears of yours. The next slide is just a shameless plug to follow along with Listen and to hopefully keep us accountable. We all need accountability partners, and we hope that over the next couple of months and throughout this year, you start to see more unique content towards these efforts. And like I said, hope you hold us accountable.
Great. Thank you so much to the Listen team, to Rick and to Nika. Really appreciate you for all of your support and for sharing your experience, which is so valuable to all of us here. My name is Juan Muldoon. I'm one of the board members at Chicago Blend. I think we're going to skip Q&A and we're just going to go straight into the wrap up. So first of all, thank you all for being here. We've had a great turnout. We want to share a couple of ways that everybody can get involved. Number one, as we mentioned, we just launched our executive director search. You can see that job description on our website. We'd love to help. We'd love to get your help sharing it with candidates in your network. Number two, we're always looking for submissions of women, Black, and Latinx board members for the Blend list. You've already heard about how valuable that resource can be. Again, you can submit that through our website as well. Number three, if your organization or you would like to support financially, please reach out to info@chicagoblend.org to learn about our sponsorship opportunities. And finally, we hope that you can use our data and our best practices to take back to your organization. Keep an eye out for more on this from all of us. Thank you again to everybody for your support of Blend, of this work, and of the Chicago technology ecosystem. We're really hopeful about the future, and we look forward to working together with all of you to really move the needle. Thanks again.